Today, at 72 years old, sitting on the porch of my home in Salem, Oregon, I watch the autumn leaves dance in the wind and realize that it took me a lifetime to understand a single truth. A truth so simple, yet so devastating, that it completely transformed who I am. My name is Susan Matthews, and this is the story of how a secret kept for 50 years finally came to light, changing not only my past, but completely redefining my future. Have you ever wondered how many lies it takes to sustain a single hidden truth? I know the answer. Thousands. And each one carries a weight you can't even imagine until, one day, they all collapse on you at once. It was a typical spring morning in 1973. I was 20 years old and had just married Richard Matthews, the most charming man in our small town in rural Oregon. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. He, with his blue eyes and captivating smile, worked at his father's sawmill. I, a recent graduate of nursing school, was about to begin my career at the local hospital. Our life seemed like one of those movies of the time, full of American promises and dreams. But there was something no one knew. Something I myself could barely admit on those silent nights, when Richard slept beside me and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of our small apartment above the pharmacy on Main Street. I didn't love Richard. Not in the way a wife should love her husband. Not in the way I saw in movies or read in the novels my mother hid under the mattress. I respected him, enjoyed his company, laughed at his jokes. But love? That overwhelming feeling that makes your heart race? I never felt that. Not on our wedding day, when I walked down the aisle of the small Methodist church in my white dress borrowed from my cousin Helen. Not on our honeymoon in Cannon Beach when we walked hand in hand on the cool Pacific sand. What I felt, and this deeply shamed me, was for someone else. For someone I could never have. For someone whose name I barely dared to pronounce aloud, even in the solitude of my most secret thoughts. Margaret Foster. Just writing that name, even now, after all these years, makes my heart race the same way it did back then. Margaret was my classmate in nursing school. She had brown hair that shone like copper in the sunlight, green eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that lit up any room. We studied together, shared dreams about our future careers, and spent hours in the campus library talking about everything and nothing, and I was hopelessly in love with her. But it was 1973. We were in rural Oregon, not in San Francisco or New York, where we heard rumors that people like me could live more openly. Here, in our small town of fewer than 5,000 inhabitants, where everyone knew everyone else, where families had attended the same church for generations, where your reputation was all you had, these feelings had no name. Or rather, they had horrible names, whispered with contempt and disgust. So I did what any young woman would do in my situation and in my time. I married Richard. I buried my feelings as deep as I could. I cut off contact with Margaret soon after graduation, making excuses about being busy with wedding preparations. I built a life that seemed normal, acceptable, respectable. And for 50 years, I kept this secret locked away somewhere so deep inside me that sometimes I even forgot it existed. The first years of my marriage were, surprisingly, good. Richard was a good man, hard-working, faithful, kind in his own way. We had 2 wonderful daughters. Jennifer was born in 74 and Sarah in 77. I dedicated myself to being the best mother I could be, working part-time at the hospital and spending the rest of my time taking care of the girls, the house, organizing birthday parties, preparing Sunday church lunches, attending book club meetings, being the model wife and mother everyone expected me to be. Richard never suspected a thing. How could he? I myself almost believed in the life I had built. Almost. But there were moments when I saw 2 women walking together in the mall and felt a pang in my chest. Moments when I watched some television program that mentioned, always with scandalous undertones, people like me, and I had to leave the room pretending I needed to check something in the kitchen. Moments when, lying next to Richard after fulfilling our marital obligations, I closed my eyes and allowed my mind to wander to forbidden places, feeling dirty and wrong afterward. Over the years, Richard and I settled into a comfortable routine. It wasn't passion, but it was partnership. We raised our daughters, saved money, bought a bigger house in a better neighborhood. We watched Jennifer graduate with a degree in education and Sarah pursue medical school. We became grandparents. Richard retired from the sawmill, which had expanded considerably under his and his brother's management. I continued, working at the hospital, eventually becoming the supervisor of the cardiology ward. From the outside, we were the perfect image of the American dream come true. A solid marriage of decades, successful daughters, adorable grandchildren, a paid-off house, a comfortable retirement, respect in the community. From the inside, I was dying. Slowly, silently. A death so gradual that I barely realized it was happening. It was in 2020, during the pandemic, that everything began to change. Like everyone else, Richard and I were isolated at home for months. Our daughters only visited us from outside, talking through the window or in the yard, wearing masks and keeping their distance. For the first time in decades, it was just the two of us, day after day, week after week, without the distractions of social activities, church commitments, and visits from grandchildren. And I realized something terrible. I realized I had absolutely nothing to say to the man with whom I had spent almost 50 years. We sat together at the dinner table in silence. We watched television without exchanging a word. He read his war books, I read my novels, and we were two complete strangers sharing the same space. Worse still, I began to resent his presence. Every time he entered the room where I was, I felt my body involuntarily tense up. When he tried to hug or kiss me, I had to force myself not to pull away. Our intimate relations, which were already rare, ceased completely, and I felt only relief. I started having insomnia. I would spend hours awake at night, staring into the darkness, wondering where my life had gone. 70 years old. I was 70 years old and felt like I had never truly lived. I had never truly been myself. I had never allowed the real person inside me to see the light of day. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I picked up my tablet, something I'd learned to use to keep in touch with my daughters and grandchildren during isolation, and started searching. I really don't know what I was looking for. Maybe validation. Maybe just confirmation that she wasn't alone. Maybe the courage I never had. I found articles about women who came out later in life. Stories of people who lived decades in denial, in heterosexual marriages, raising families, before finally accepting their true identity. I watched videos of women my age, some even older, talking about how they finally found the courage to live authentically. I read about the concept of late age, lesbianism, and how it was more common than I imagined. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think about the word. I allowed myself to apply it to myself. Lesbian. I was a lesbian, not bisexual, not confused, not going through a phase. Lesbian. I always have been, for as long as I can remember. Since those first confusing feelings in adolescence when I thought I just admired certain friends. Since Margaret. Forever. I cried that night. I cried for hours, silently, so as not to wake Richard. I cried for the 20-year-old I was, so scared and alone that I thought marrying a man was my only option. I cried for the 50 years I spent living a lie. I cried for the person I could have been if I had been born in a different time, in a different place. And then, for the first time in my life, I felt something other than shame. I felt anger. Anger at the society that forced me to hide who I was. Anger at the religion that taught me my feelings were sinful and wrong. Anger at myself for being too cowardly to live my truth. anger for wasting an entire life. But I also felt something else. I felt a small spark of hope, because I realized it wasn't too late. I was still alive. I still had time. Not much, perhaps, but some time. And for the first time, I wanted to use that time to truly be myself. The following months were the most difficult of my life. I started online therapy, something the pandemic had made possible and even normal. My therapist, a wonderful woman named Dr. Chen, helped me process decades of denial and repression. Gradually, I began to accept the truth about myself, not with shame, but with a kind of sad peace. But there was still the matter of Richard, and the girls, and the grandchildren, and our whole life built together. How do you undo 50 years? How do you look at a man who has never been anything but good to you and say, "I lied to you throughout our marriage"? How do you explain to your adult daughters that everything they thought they knew about their mother was a facade? In December of 2020, Richard had a heart attack. It wasn't fatal, thank God, but it was serious enough to require surgery and months of recovery. I took care of him, as I always did, as I promised to do when I said, in sickness and in health. But while caring for him, while checking his medications, preparing his low-sodium meals, accompanying him to follow-up appointments, I realized something. I realized I was doing all this out of obligation, not love. And Richard deserved more than that. He deserved a wife who truly loved him, who wanted to be with him, not just out of duty, but out of genuine choice. And I deserved the chance to finally live my truth. It was in March of 2021, a week after Richard was fully discharged from the hospital, that I finally found the courage. We waited until after dinner. We sat in the living room, the same room where we had spent thousands of nights over the years, and I began to speak. It wasn't easy. The words came out awkwardly, clumsily after so many years of silence. I told him about Margaret, although I didn't mention her name. I told him about the feelings I'd always had, the feelings I'd tried to bury, repress, deny. I told him that I respected him, that he was a good man, a good father, but that I had never loved him the way he deserved to be loved. And then I said the words I never thought I'd say out loud. Richard, I'm gay. I always have been. And I can't live this lie anymore. He remained silent for a long time, so long that I began to wonder if he had heard me. Then, finally, he spoke. I knew. Those two words shocked me more than any angry reaction could have done. What? Not consciously, perhaps, he said, his voice calm and tired. But on some level, I always knew. The way you pulled away from my touch, the way you never seemed truly present when we were together. I just didn't want to admit it, didn't want to see it. Because if I saw it, I'd have to do something about it. And I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose our family. We both cried that night. We cried for the lost time, for the lives we could have lived, for the love that never truly existed between us the way it should have. But we also talked. We really talked, perhaps for the first time in decades. Richard admitted that he too had felt alone in the marriage, that he always felt there was a part of me he could never reach. He said he sometimes wondered if it was his fault, if he wasn't man enough, if he should try harder. The pain in his voice when he said that almost broke my heart. It wasn't your fault, I said, holding her hands. It never was. You were a wonderful husband. The problem was never you. It was me. It was always me. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for wasting your life. You didn't waste my life, Susan, he replied. We had beautiful daughters, wonderful grandchildren, good memories. It wasn't all a lie. It's just, it wasn't all true either. We decided to separate, not immediately. Richard was still recovering, and the pandemic still made everything complicated. But we started making plans. We talked to the girls together. It was difficult. Jennifer cried. Sarah was too shocked to react initially. They asked questions, lots of questions. Some I could answer, some I couldn't. "How long did you know?" Jennifer asked, tears streaming down her face. "I always knew, my love," I replied honestly. But I didn't have the words for it. I wasn't allowed to. Not at the time I married your father. "So our marriage was based on a lie?" Sarah asked, looking between me and her father. "No," Richard replied before I could. "It was based on two people doing the best they could with the letters they received. Your mother didn't lie to me on purpose. She lied to herself, and I chose not to see things that could have made everything clearer. It took time. Months of difficult conversations, family therapy, tears, and rebuilding. Relationships. But eventually, my daughters began to understand. They began to see their mother not as a liar, but as a woman who lived under impossible circumstances, who made difficult choices in a very different time. Richard and I finalized our divorce in the fall of 2021. It was amicable, as a divorce can be after 50 years. We divided our assets equally. I kept our house. He bought an apartment near Sarah's house. We remained friends. We still have dinner together occasionally, especially on grandchildren's birthdays and holidays. It's strange, but it works. And for the first time in my life, at 71 years old, I began to live authentically. I joined a support group for older LGBT women. I met people with stories surprisingly similar to mine. Women who had lived decades in denial, who had raised families, who had finally found the courage to live their truths later in life. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I started dressing the way I'd always wanted to, but never dared to. I cut my hair short, something Richard never liked. I started wearing jeans and comfortable t-shirts instead of the flowery dresses I always thought I should wear. It sounds silly, but these little things made a huge difference. And then, 6 months ago, at a support group event, I met someone. Carol is 73 years old, a retired teacher who came out of the closet 10 years ago after her husband's death. She has kind eyes, a wonderful sense of humor, and for the first time in my life, I feel what other people must feel when they talk about being in love. We're not rushing. At our age, there's no need. But we're getting to know each other, spending time together, building something real and genuine. And when she kisses me, I feel a connection that I've never, not even once in 50 years of marriage, felt with Richard. I look back now and still feel sadness for the lost years, for the moments I never had, for the experiences I never lived, for the person I repressed for so long. I feel sadness for Richard too, for having trapped him in a marriage where he was never truly loved in the romantic way he deserved. But I also feel gratitude. Gratitude for finally finding the courage. Gratitude for still having time, even if it's not much, to truly be myself. Gratitude for my daughters, who, after the initial shock, supported me unconditionally. Jennifer even marched with me in the Portland Pride Parade this year, holding a sign that read, "I love my brave mom." And I feel hope. Hope that maybe my story can help someone else out there who is struggling, who is hiding, who is afraid. Hope that maybe, eventually, we will live in a world where no child has to grow up feeling that who they are is wrong, that no 20-year-old has to marry someone they don't love because they are too afraid to live their truth. The truth I finally faced after so many years isn't just that I'm a lesbian. That's only part of it. The bigger truth is that suppressing who you really are, living a lie, no matter how well-intentioned, takes a toll. A toll on your mental health, on your relationships, on your very soul. I am 72 years old now. I don't know how much time I have left, but the time I have, I will live as the real Susan. Not as the Susan everyone expected me to be. Not as the Susan who built an entire life around what was acceptable and respectable. But as the Susan who has always been there, waiting, all this time, for a permission to finally be seen. And for those watching this, for those who may be grappling with their own truth, whatever that may be, it's never too late. Yes, I wish I had done this sooner. I wish I'd had the courage at 20 or 30 or 40. But doing it at 71 was still better than never doing it at all. Your truth matters. You matter. And you deserve to live authentically, no matter how many people it might disappoint, no matter how scary it is, no matter how old you are. Because in the end, when you're lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, it's not other people's opinions that matter. It's whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. And now, finally, after 72 years, I can. Some people ask me if I have regrets, if I look back and feel like I wasted my life. And my answer is complicated. Yes, there are regrets. Regrets for not having been braver. Regrets for the years I spent living half a life. Never. Truly present. Always hiding an essential part of who I am. Regrets for denying Richard the chance to find someone who could love him completely, the way he deserved. But I also understand the young woman I was. I understand the fear she felt. I understand that I did the best I could with the tools I had in a time that offered no real alternatives for people like me. I can't blame her for surviving in the only way she knew how. What gives me peace now is knowing that, even late, I made the right choice. That I freed not only myself, but also Richard. That I showed my daughters that it's never too late to be authentic. That my grandchildren are growing up in a world where they see their grandmother living honestly, and perhaps this will teach them something important about courage and authenticity. Carol tells me I'm one of the bravest people she knows. I laugh when she says that, because I don't feel brave. I feel like someone who has finally stopped running from herself. Someone who, too tired to keep pretending, has simply surrendered to the truth. But perhaps that's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to, despite the fear, finally stop lying. To yourself first, and then to the world. I now live each day as a gift. Every breakfast with Carol, every honest conversation with my daughters, every time I can simply be myself, without masks, without lies, without shame. These moments are precious in a way they never could have been if I hadn't lived. 71 years without them. If this story touched you in any way, if you saw yourself in any part of it, or if you know someone who needs to hear this, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories from real people who found the courage to live their truths. And tell me in the comments, what city are you from? I'm curious to know where the people watching these videos are from, and I'd love to know that I'm not speaking to a void, but to real people, in real places, with their own stories to tell. Thank you for listening to mine. From Salem, Oregon, with love and courage, this is Susan Matthews, and this is my truth.